Right, so this video lesson is going to focus on a power and conflict poetry anthology off the AQA syllabus, and the two poems that will form the basis for this question are Storm on the Island and the Prelude, Boat Stealing, or Stealing the Boat, depends on which title you've got. Hop on over if you're kind of unfamiliar with these two poems or need a bit of a brush up in terms of revising them and knowing what they're about and techniques and so on, then hop on over to the two videos I've got on Storm on the Island and the Prelude, and then come back to this one fully equipped. Okay, a reminder of the assessment objectives. It's a 30-mark question. You have 45 minutes to answer it, and the marks are broken down 12, 12, 6, as is typical with the AQA literature syllabus. AO1 12 marks, AO2 12 marks, and AO3 context 6 marks. Now, interesting point about this: the examiners don't expect you to devote a separate paragraph to context, but rather you will automatically cover it whilst answering the question. Okay, so don't be looking to do a specific paragraph just on context, and I'll explain that a little bit later. Okay, there's more than one way to skin a cat, or more than one way to cook an egg. What I mean by this is that there's not just one acceptable way to answer this question. Your teacher may well have given you structure for answering this question, which will be fantastic. I'm going to put forward my particular recommendation for how you structure and answer this question, but there's not one way to do it. Okay, if you're comfortable with your teacher's way, if you're comfortable with my way, that's absolutely fine. You go with what suits you best. In black there you'll see my kind of buzz phrase, if you like: method and meaning. Method are techniques and devices, and meaning is the interpretations of these devices. That's the key. That's what the examiner's looking for: language, form, structure, and how language, form and structure create effect. That is your method and your meaning. I'll be revisiting this throughout this video, and if you've watched any of my other videos you'll probably be fed up with method and meaning. Okay, so this particular question: compare the ways poets present the power of the natural world in Storm on the Island and one other poem from Power and Conflict. So a couple of little observations on the question. First thing you need to do is to read the question, highlight the key words, in this case the power of the natural world. Everything then you write about incorporates the power of the natural world. The most important word in the question though is compare. My advice is to compare in every paragraph. Now, you don't have to do that. You can talk about one poem and then talk about the other poem and then do a little comparison at the end. You can do that. For me, I think that risks not fulfilling this part of the question sufficiently. But again, it's up to you. I would compare. So when you're talking about structure, compare this different structure between the two poems, the similarities and the differences. That's my advice. You also need to identify the second poem. So I'll talk about how you select your second poem in a minute. I'm going to do the prelude for this question. Basically, the premise is you don't compare poems in terms of how they look or how they set out on the page. It's more conceptualized, the ideas behind them, the story behind the poem, see if they're similar. So, this one's about the natural world, so that kind of limits you to, say, 4 or 5 poems from your anthology that you could use to compare to Storm on the Island. Okay, so now you've read the question, you understand what it's looking for, you're thinking about the second poem you're going to use, but you've got the printed poem in front of you. Off you go. You read through it and you highlight it, you identify your techniques, and you think of points you can make in reference to the question in particular. I think there was something else I had to say about that. I can't remember what it is now. It'll come back to me. Actually, this helps. The examiners insist that a plan is crucial. It helps you structure your answer properly. Every examiner's report I've ever read states that students who show evidence of planning routinely secure higher marks in their exam. So you've got 45 minutes for this question, so 10-minute plan, 30-minute writing, and 5 minutes to check over your work. Always reread your work. Just for quality of writing, you may see some points you might want to add quickly, but give yourself 5 minutes at the end. I know timing is tight on this paper, but do try and stick to it. This will be your section B question, your second question, so you've still got the unseen poetry question to tackle after this one if you do it in order. Okay, I'll talk to the rest of it in a minute. Okay, I've highlighted the poem like this. This is not for you to read necessarily. Good luck if you want to attempt deciphering my handwriting. But it's just to show you what I mean. And don't ignore the title either. So I've annotated it and I've made some notes that I think I can use in my answer to this question. And these then are: one long stanza plus blank verse could reflect the freedom of nature or the endless battering from the storm. Remember, method and meaning. Your method, long stanza, blank verse, meaning freedom of nature or the endless battering from the relentless battering of the storm. The poem moves from security and confidence at the beginning to fear and vulnerability in the face of the power of the storm, or the power of nature. A semantic field of war is used to reflect the violent nature of the storm and its impact on the islanders, method and meaning. Use of enjambment and caesura highlights blast and savage, quite violent terminology. Okay, so some points I've made there. Now, how do I select the second poem? Good question. Pat myself on the back. The best advice, straight from examiners, as I've mentioned, is to base your answer on an idea or attitude and then take a two-pronged approach to the question. You should be looking to link two poems based on their meaning rather than both, say, being in sonnet form. For example, both Storm on the Island and the Prelude deal with the effects of nature on the individual, in each instance including a sense of awe and vulnerability in the presence of a certain aspect of nature. One is dealing with the effects of a powerful storm on some islanders, whilst the other explores the speaker's response to feelings of insignificance he feels in the presence of an imposing mountain as it looms up over the horizon. And that's kind of my introduction to the answer, in fact. But I'm comparing them to two poems based on their theme rather than how they look, for example. So some tips then. You need to focus on language, form, structure, and how they create effect. That is what the examiner is looking for in this question and indeed in your literature paper as a whole. Language, form, structure, and how they create effect. You must use relevant terminology and making links with context where appropriate, though this may occur naturally in the answering of the question. If it helps, now you don't have to do this, quite rigid, you could follow the smile structure. Keep watching, it's coming up. You smile at poetry. Who would have thought it? Use the language of the question throughout. Always link back to the question in each paragraph and for each poem. So in this case, it's the power of nature. A topic sentence at the start of each paragraph will ensure you remain focused on the actual question. So kind of using the language of the question in your opening line to each of your paragraphs. Okay, how to structure answers. This is the smile format. You don't have to use this. You can talk about structure. As long as you're talking about language, form, and structure, maybe in 3 paragraphs, 3 detailed paragraphs, and do comparisons within each of those paragraphs, that would absolutely be fine. Little introduction at the start, brief conclusion at the end. Okay, but if you want to have a look at the smile structure, smile stands for structure, meaning, mood, imagery, language, and effects. You can read through, you can pause it, or if you've got the printout, you can have a look at it. I do present you with lots of techniques here within each section, and that's quite useful as well. So, for example, with structure, I said you can use, is there a rhyme scheme? Any reason for particular words being rhymed? If there's no rhyme scheme, why might that be? Look at the stanzas. What's the line length like? What about caesura, enjambment, end stop? Look at the use of punctuation, and so on. I've done the same for meaning and imagery, and on the next screen, language and effects. Now, effects is incorporated into every single paragraph. It's not a separate paragraph. It's like language, form, structure, and how they create effect, how they create meaning, method and meaning. Okay, so I know I'm whizzing through those pages, but you can pause and read them at your own pace. Just to kind of summarise, a list of poetic devices that you can incorporate. Great for the anthology. Also, jot them down for your unseen section as well, because invariably several of these will appear on the poem that pops up on that paper, on that question rather. So again, I'm not going to read through them all now. You can have a look at them, pause the screen and make some notes on them as you choose. So some points of comparison between the two poems. Remember, I'm picking the Prelude, Boat Stealing, or Stealing the Boat, whichever it's called. There is, I keep mentioning different titles. It's on 3 different syllabus and it's got 3 different titles. So off the top of my head, I can't remember the AQA title exactly, but it's the Prelude stealing the boat or boat stealing. Both poems move from security and confidence to fear and vulnerability, though the energy differs between the two, reflecting in the contrasting language choices. It's very serene in the Prelude, whereas it's quite violent in Storm on the Island. Heaney uses natural imagery to reflect the political troubles. Stormont, that's the home of the Northern Irish government, and it's spelt out in Storm on the Island. The first 8 letters spell this out. And violence in Northern Ireland, and to explore where man lies within the natural world. Whereas the Prelude is an autobiographical poem where the narrator recalls taking a boat out onto a lake. Wordsworth, as a romantic poet, and that's a good context bit there, often explores the relationship between man and nature and how one is shaped by the other. So you're ticking your context box there. The language used in Storm on the Island carries more violent imagery than the Prelude, which in turn is full of pretty pastoral images of nature, though both poems do explore the fear nature is capable of inducing in the individual. Okay, so some kind of points for comparison, part of my plan. So recalling the structure, here's a sample opening paragraph, and I think I'll have focused on structure and form here. Okay, both, look at the comparative connective there straight away. Both Storm on the Island and the Prelude explore the power of the natural world and its impact on man. In Storm on the Island, Heaney describes a rural community preparing for the arrival of a storm, and how their confidence slowly ebbs away once the full force of nature reveals itself through the storm. By contrast, there's my comparison, I'm comparing in each paragraph, the Prelude perceives the natural world in a more passive way. Wordsworth describes an experience he had when he took a boat out onto a lake. Everything was going well, he was feeling strong and confident, until he noticed a huge peak appear on the horizon, after which he becomes intimidated and overawed by its sheer size and power, and has to return to the shore. Storm on the Island is written in blank verse over one long stanza, which lends it a more conversational tone. This is reinforced with the use of first-person plural we in the opening line. The rhythm is a regular 10 syllables per line and is unrhymed, perhaps reflecting the freedom of nature. The poem moves from security to fear, with the turning point, Volta, coming on line 14, but no, signalling the arrival of the storm. Sosora and the colon here emphasises the impact of the storm. Similarly, I'm comparing again within the same paragraph, in the Prelude the narrator moves from security to fear. It is written as a first-person narrative in blank verse, also similar, also lending it a more personal feel. The regular rhythm, iambic pentameter, adds to this more natural style, like natural speech. The enjambment throughout reveals the overflow of powerful feelings the narrator experiences, method and meaning. Identifying techniques will get you a grade 4 or 5. It's good, it's important. But to get a 6, 7, 8 and above, you need to explore the effect, the meaning created by the use of these techniques. And you could offer some tentative analysis, could imply, perhaps, so not definitive analysis necessarily. Okay, further points you could make on the meaning, mood, tone, context. Storm on the Island, the first 8 letters of the title spell out Stormont, which is where the Northern Ireland government is based. So this poem may have some reference to the violent troubles that have existed between the Catholic and Protestant elements of the country. Heaney grew up in Northern Ireland, and much of his poetry contains natural imagery to explore human nature and its place in the world. The Prelude is an autobiographical piece in which the narrator recalls when he takes a boat out onto a lake. At first he is confident and happy, but as a large mountain looms into sight, he becomes afraid of its size and power and instantly turns back, returning the boat, forced to contemplate the true power of nature. As a romantic poet, Wordsworth explores the relationship between man and nature and how one is shaped by the other. This is an extract from the Prelude, which focuses on key moments and experiences in his life. Next point you can make, or the final point you can make, language and imagery. Remember, language, form and structure. So I've covered the 3 main areas that you'll need to cover. Excuse me, something stuck in my throat. You're about to witness someone die online. No, I jest. Right, language and imagery. The storm in Storm on the Island is described in violent, often warlike terms, with similes, metaphors and personification combining to emphasise the danger posed by it. This could also reference the violent troubles of Northern Ireland's recent past. Contrasting images of safety and fear throughout hint at the potential power of the storm and its unpredictable nature. Sound imagery, that should be blast, tragic chorus, serves to demonstrate the strength of nature also, whereas in the Prelude, natural imagery with descriptions of the moon and sparkling light effectively portray the initial carefree mood and is indicative of a romantic poet. The language is confident at this point, straight and proud of his skills in the boat reflecting this. Then we have more gothic imagery as the tone becomes darker and the mountain appears, and the narrator begins to understand the more threatening, powerful presence of nature. There hung a darkness in the air, solitude and blank desertion, portraying the impact this experience has had on the narrator. Okay, so that's quite a lot of information there. I've written a lot of it for you. If you're, oh, there's me usual gag at the end. Oh dear. Anyway, a reminder though, if you're on the premium package, you can submit an answer to this question to me, and I'll give it a grade with a lot of feedback as to how you can improve, or just try it yourself and maybe submit it to your teacher at school. Either way, best of luck, and I'll see you for the next video. Bye now.